invite you to turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9. Last week I told you a story about a friend of mine. I know there were some people who weren't here. I won't get into the whole story. I'll just give you the brief summary so you'll understand where I'm coming from. A friend of mine went to Israel, went with a group of pastors, and the pastors they had just gotten there. They were getting ready to go on their tours, and one of the pastors, the lead pastor, kind of opened up, and he was going to open up in prayer, open up their time out there in prayer, and he simply said, "Dear Father and Mother God, thank you for bringing us to this place where all religions come into one, and as we realize that there are many ways to God," and went on and finished his prayer. And it bothered my friend, as my friend went around, he was just asking different pastors, church leaders, by the way, people who have influence on the spiritual growth and understanding of many people up underneath them. He asked them what their thoughts were about that, and most all of them were like, "Yeah, I believe that there are many ways to God." And finally, David asked them, said, "So why then did Jesus come to die?" And the pastors just looked at him and said, "Well, couldn't help it. It was the wrong place at the wrong time. He couldn't help it. He just got killed. That's all there is to it." I'm going to talk to you this morning, just like I said I would last week. I want to talk to you about right place, right time. Jesus was in the right place at the right time, and he was very, very deliberate to get there. In fact, really, this morning, if I want to let you in on a secret, I probably shouldn't. There are certain secrets that preachers have when they're preaching about how they preach. And I like to take passages and kind of unfold them and talk about different points that come out. This morning, I really want you to know, if I'm going to be upfront and honest with you, this morning is one big, hopefully not too long, illustration. It is just an illustration of the fact that Jesus was at the right place at the right time, very intentionally. Now, in order for you to get the most out of the message today, you will do well to have your Bible open and in front of you. There's not a growth guide. There's not anything for you to follow along in your bulletin, because really we're just going to be walking through the Gospel of Luke, one to another, to another, to another. We're going to be looking at a lot of different passages. I'll do so as quickly as possible, get you out of here. But understand, it's one illustration in the Bible. You have to understand that there is nothing by mistake in the Bible. Not if God is involved. There's nothing in there that is by mistake, and He is going to send a very clear message that honestly, oddly, is easy to overlook if you're not looking for it. And so I want to bring this out as clearly as I possibly can here this morning. Luke chapter 9, I hope you're there, and I want to show you a passage that really, at first glance, is quite odd. Look over at verse 51. Luke chapter 9 and verse 51, it simply says this: "When the days were approaching for his ascension," that is the end of his time here on the planet, "he was determined to go to Jerusalem." He was determined to go to Jerusalem. Now, you know I love the New American Standard Bible. That's what I read out of. If you're ever wondering, well, what translation is he reading from? More than likely, 99.5% of the time, I will be reading out of the New American Standard. But actually, in this particular case, if you were to go to the King James or the New King James, it would have the most literal translation of this phrase. Jesus was determined to go to Jerusalem. Literally, it says, Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. You ever seen that look? I remember one of the starkest looks I remember seeing was, gosh, I can't believe now, it's been 10 years ago. 10 years ago, many of you know that if you follow basketball, not too long ago, Kobe Bryant died and was killed in a helicopter crash. But I remember 10 years ago when they were in the finals, the NBA finals, he was up against the Boston Celtics, and there was just this, I can still see it very vividly in my mind. Something, the crowd was going crazy. It was a pivotal point in in the series. It was toward the end of the game, and they just focused in on his face, and his face was looking resolutely toward one thing, and I don't know what he was physically looking at, but what was on his mind, the only thing that was on his mind was winning that championship, which of course they did. So glad to say. They won that championship. But his face was resolutely set. He set his face on that championship. Jesus set his face on Jerusalem. Now, I want to ask you a couple of questions here that ought to be sensible questions. Why now? Why here and why now? Why at the juncture of Luke 9:51? Why then? I want you to know, first of all, it really was not a very, humanly speaking, it wasn't a very smart decision. He had already begun to make, long before this, he had already begun to make some definite enemies. You don't have to turn there, but if you were to take notes, and I always encourage taking notes, whether or not I have them in your bulletin or not, here are a few passages you may want to think about. Luke chapter 6, verse 11. You don't have to turn there. Let me just read it. It says, "But they themselves," meaning the Pharisees, "were filled with rage and discussed together what they might do to Jesus." Long before now, they were already plotting this. Matthew chapter 12, verse 14, which in chronological terms was long before what we have read about in Luke 9:51. Matthew 12:14 says, "But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him." They had a little conference. They had a little committee meeting. They said, "We don't like this guy. What are we going to do about this?" As to how they might destroy him. Not stop him, not just keep him quiet, not lock him up. Destroy him. Matthew chapter 15, verses 1 and 2 says, "Then some Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus," listen to this, "from Jerusalem, and said, 'Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread.'" So they came and they asked the disciples really a very simple question. And Jesus' response went something like this. He says, "Why do you yourselves transgress the commandment of God?" Why are you breaking God's commandments? For the sake of your tradition. He goes on down, verse 7 of chapter 15. He says, "You hypocrites." He looks them straight in the face. "You hypocrites, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you." He was talking about you when he said, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." He looked at them in the face and said this, and so the disciples came back to Jesus a little bit later on, and they said, the disciples came to him and said, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this statement?" Well, duh, of course they would have been. Jesus was making enemies long before now, and not only had word gotten back to Jerusalem, to the Pharisees of Jerusalem, they decided that they would send some of their own Pharisees to Jesus up in Galilee, and then Jesus, to their face, told them, "You're hypocrites." All these things that are negative in the Bible about that God had to say about his people, specifically about me. Why would he then turn around and go to Jerusalem? Listen, it's not as if, you got to pay attention to this, especially if you were in the crowd of these pastors in Israel on that day. It's not as if Jesus didn't know how to get out of it. He did. Do you think that when he walked into Jerusalem, they grabbed him and bound him and took him with all the swords and all the flames, and they took him to before the high priest? Do you think that was the first time that Jesus ever had a close call? No. You can go to the book of John. Let me just give you 3 places in the book of John. Again, you don't have to turn there. John chapter 7, verse 30. It says, "So they were seeking to seize him." The Pharisees were seeking to seize him, and no one laid his hands on him because his hour had not yet come. I believe here you have the Spirit of God interceding, intercepting what could have happened to Jesus. John chapter 8 and verse 59. After he had really slammed everything that they believed in, it says, "Therefore they picked up," the Pharisees picked up stones to throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. One case you got the Spirit who delivers him. On the other case, you got Jesus who himself went to a place within the church and hid behind a column or the choir chairs or behind a pew or something so that they couldn't find him. John chapter 11, verse 54. Therefore, Jesus no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went away from there to the country near the wilderness into a city called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples because they wanted to kill him. So he just decided not only to not go there so that he would have to escape, he just decided to avoid the place altogether. Can I just tell you, Jesus knew how to get out of troubling situations. And yet he was now thrusting himself toward that situation. Why? What changed? Have you ever thought about that? If he avoided it all this time, and he told people on several different occasions, my hour has not yet come, and now he has set his face on Jerusalem, what turned? Why? I want to point you, you're there in Luke chapter 9, I hope you are still there. Beginning in verse 28, is the story of the Transfiguration. It's kind of troubling to me how many people don't know the story of the Transfiguration. Jesus is up on a mount. He's with his three closest disciples. And while he is there, there's this bright light that comes. And all of a sudden, two men appear and show up with Jesus. Jesus has a bright face. And two men show up, and it turns out to be Elijah and Moses. The Bible says that they're talking. All of them are talking. And when the two guys go away, the disciples they're wowed, they're oohed, they're awed, and they want to have a worship service. They want to build altars to all three of them and have church. Perfectly logical response. There are three Gospels that talk about the Transfiguration. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John doesn't talk about it. The other three talk about it. And what's really interesting in that is the fact that the three of those men were talking. Elijah, Moses, and Jesus were having a conversation. Matthew and Mark, that is all they say. They just said that they were talking. Doesn't really say anything about it. Luke is the only gospel that gives us a picture, a hint, a clue as to what they were talking about. Look at verse 31. Verse 30 ends by saying, Moses and Elijah, who appearing in glory, were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. What is it that they were talking about at the Transfiguration? They were talking about the death of Jesus. The message that came was simply, it's time. It's time. And that changed Jesus' whole focus. My mind, when I think about this, my mind goes back to 9/11. You know the stories of 9/11. You've heard of United Airlines Flight 93. You've maybe heard of a guy named Todd Beamer. Todd Beamer was on that flight, and Todd Beamer, as soon as he knew what was going on, they'd heard what was going on. They'd heard that the World Trade Center had been demolished. And they heard about what was going on, and so Todd Beamer got on the phone that was on the flight, that was on the plane. He got on that, and he was directed immediately to, I think it was customer service. It was a company rep that his phone call was diverted to, and the company rep turned it over to a supervisor. He was talking with the supervisor. Told him what was going on, that the plane had been hijacked, that the two pilots had been removed, and that there had already been a death on the flight. Todd Beamer said that there was a group of men who were going to try to take the flight back over. They were going to try to overcome those terrorists that day. Last words that they said that he had uttered was they said something like, "It's time to go? Okay, let's roll. Let's roll. I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to put ourselves in danger. We're going to try to overcome this thing. Let's go." Luke 9:51, when he sets his face toward Jerusalem, is his declaration that says, "It's time? And suddenly, all of the stuff about my hour has not yet come. Let me go hide behind the columns. Let me avoid the situation. He says, there's the problem. There's the danger. Let's roll. Now, Luke is going to give us different markers along the way. And because of the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all those, but here's a map of Israel in the days of Jesus. And I know you can't make out everything that is there, but it is believed that, you may not be able to see that marker right there, my little red laser pointer, but it is believed that the Mount of Transfiguration, nobody exactly knows where that took place, but more than likely, some people say it was down here at Mount Tabor, probably not. There is a mount that's right in this area, just in the northwest part of the Sea of Galilee. That's the Sea of Galilee right there. That could be it, but more than likely it's Mount Hermon right up here, right in the northern part, up there at Caesarea Philippi, right at the northern edge of Israel. That's probably the best place that we can come up with. And what we're going to see now is Luke is going to, if you don't have an atlas when you're doing a Bible study, it's kind of easy to miss out on this, but if you put yourself in Luke's position and the position of his immediate readers, he is going to send them some very specific directions of where Jesus is going. In other words, it's a visual illustration of Jesus with his eyes set to Jerusalem. For instance, in chapter 17 and verse 11, it says that he is going to make his way through between Galilee and Samaria. There's Samaria, there's Galilee. And so he's going to come from up here. He's going to make his way right down in this area. So he's come from here. He's going to be here. Then, further on in Luke chapter 18, verse 35, it says that he approaches Jericho. Jericho is right down here. So we see that he's come from here. He's come down here. Come down that's the Jordan River right there. He's come down the Jordan River. And now he's getting ready to make his way over to Jericho. Chapter 19, verse 1. He enters Jericho. Chapter 19 and verse 11. It's going to get more frequent. It's going to get more detail as he gets there. From Jericho to Jerusalem, I've made that trip before. It's like 10, 15 minutes. It's not very far. He's gone through Jericho, and now he is getting ready to approach Jerusalem. Chapter 19, verse 28, it says that he's going up to Jerusalem, somewhere between Jericho and Jerusalem. Chapter 19, verse 29, it says that he approaches Bethany. Bethany is on this map, is right there. There's Jerusalem, there's Bethany. They're really basically across the street from each other. It's like, I was going to say Savannah, Richmond Hill. It's really even closer than that. Chapter 19, verse 37 says he is descending the Mount of Olives, which nowadays literally is right across the street. Chapter 19, verse 41 says he is at the edge of Jerusalem. Chapter 19, verse 45 says that he enters Jerusalem, what we know of as the triumphal entry. Luke is showing us very visually, he is making his way to the cross. But not only does he do that, not only does he kind of show the progression, but it's very interesting. And this, I hope you have your Bible. I want you to turn in your Bibles. Make sure you're with me in the book of Luke. What is it that Jesus does after he gets this pronouncement from Elijah, this message from Elijah and Moses that says it's time? How does Jesus respond? What is it that he does? You ever thought about that? What is it that Jesus did between the Mount of Transfiguration and Jerusalem? Let's just look at a few things and let's just see what we think about. Was he just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Follow along with me, if you will. Luke chapter 11. Luke chapter 11 in verse 37. Now when he had spoken, when he had spoken, a Pharisee asked him to have lunch with him. And he went in and reclined at the table. So here's the setting. He is at the house of a Pharisee. When the Pharisee saw it, he was surprised that he had not first ceremonially washed before the meal. But the Lord said, Jesus said to him, now you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but inside of you You are full of robbery and wickedness. Oh. Hey, what a guest. What if you invited somebody to your house? They said, you're nothing but a thief. How would that go over? Let's get down to verse 42. But woe to you Pharisees. Remember, he's in their house. Woe to you Pharisees, for you pay tithe of mint and rue and every kind of garden herb, and yet disregard the justice and the love of God. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the other. Woe to you Pharisees, for you love the chief seats in the synagogues and the respectful greetings in the marketplaces. Woe to you, for you are like concealed tombs, and the people who walk over them are unaware of it. Ouch. What do you think? What do you think their response was? You think Jesus was surprised when we get down to verse 53? Look at verse 53. When he left there, the scribes and the Pharisees began to be very hostile and to question him closely on many subjects, plotting against him to catch him in something he might say. Chapter 12, verse 1. Under these circumstances, after so many thousands of people had gathered together, that they were stepping on one another, he began saying to his disciples, remember, under these circumstances, this is with the Pharisees in attendance, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. These people they already don't like it. Jesus, just chill out for a second. I mean, you realize these guys are after you, right? And he just keeps turning the knife. Chapter 13. Skip over to chapter 13, verse 10. And Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. There was a woman who for 18 years had had a sickness caused by a spirit, and she was bent double and could not straighten up at all. Jesus saw her, he called her over and said to her, woman, you are freed from your sickness. He laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made erect again and began glorifying God. But the synagogue official, of course, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, began saying to the crowd in response, there are 6 days in which work should be done, so come during them and get healed, and not on the Sabbath day. But the Lord answered him and said, you hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the stall and lead him away to water? And this woman, a daughter of Abraham as she is, whom Satan has bound for 18 long years, should she not have been released from this bond on the Sabbath day? As he said this, all his opponents were being humiliated. He humiliated his opponents in their own home court in the synagogue. The entire crowd was rejoicing over all the glorious things being done by him. Humiliated. You ever picture Jesus humiliating someone? And he did that on his way to the cross. Really? Chapter 14. It happened that when in the first verse, it happened that when he went into the house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees, who's going to the house of another one, but this time it's like the chairman of the Pharisees. The leaders of the Pharisees on the Sabbath to eat bread, they were watching him closely. You think he wasn't aware of that? And there in front of him was a man suffering from dropsy. Jesus answered and spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? And they kept silent. He took hold of him and healed him and sent him away. He already knew what they felt about healing on the Sabbath. They had already made that clear. And so he decided to go to the leader's house and do it. Chapter 14, skip down to verse 25. Verse 25 says, now the large crowds were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. What? I can hate my family? Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Oh man, that sounds so spiritual today. Man, in Jesus' name, that was a sick thought. Carry your own cross. Chapter 15. Verse 1 and 2. Now all the tax collectors and sinners, these are the dregs of society. These are the rejects. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to him to listen to him. Both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." It's funny how Jesus accepted the rejects and rejected the accepted. Chapter 16, verse 14. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and were scoffing at him. And he said to them, "You are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts. For that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God." Chapter 18. Chapter 18, beginning in verse 31. He took the 12 aside and said to them, that he's going to explain to them this journey. We've seen that he's already, what we would call, if we were in the business world or something along those lines, we would say that Jesus is already nailing his own coffin. He's already done that. And now he's going to explain why. He's illustrated it in a map. We've seen Luke tell us how he's dug his own grave, if you will. Now Luke is going to tell us why. An explanation of the journey is in Luke chapter 18, beginning in verse 31. He took the 12 aside and said to them, "Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and all things which are written about through the prophets about the Son of Man will be accomplished. For he'll be handed over to the Gentiles, and will be mocked, and mistreated, and spit upon, and after they have scourged him, they will kill him. And the third day he will rise again." And then the results of this little journey that he has taken in chapter 20 and in verse 19. He's made the triumphal entry. Chapter 20, verse 19 says, "The scribes and the chief priests tried to lay hands on him that very hour, and they feared the people. For they understood that he spoke his parable against them. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be righteous, in order that they might catch him in some statement, so that they could deliver him to the rule and the authority of the government." What Jesus set out to do, since Luke chapter 9 and verse 51, was accomplished. Mission accomplished. Now I want to give you one more little detail in case you're not convinced, and I believe most of you are. I believe. But I want to give you something else that hopefully will just rock your socks. I want you to turn to the book of Mark. Luke doesn't really give a lot of detail about the triumphal entry. Not this detail. I want you to turn back to Mark chapter 11. Mark chapter 11 is going to give a very, very significant detail that proves Jesus was in the right place at the right time. The triumphal entry has occurred in the first 10 verses. He's come in, everybody's rejoiced, everybody's been excited. And I want us to see, once he gets there, let's look and see what Jesus does. Mark chapter 11 and verse 11. Jesus entered Jerusalem and came into the temple, and after looking around at everything, he left for Bethany with the 12, since it was already late. On the next day, when they had left Bethany, he became hungry, seeing at a distance a fig tree and leaf. He went to see if perhaps he could find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples were listening. And he'll get back to that later. We won't, but he does later on in the story. Then they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he would not permit anyone to carry merchandise through the temple. And he began to teach and to say to them, Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a robber's den." You know this story. Can you just picture, maybe you've seen movies about it. Maybe you can picture it in your mind. Jesus walks into this church, and he takes all the things that have been going on, and he starts just disrupting everything. I mean, he just goes crazy. He goes berserk. He's throwing stuff around. He's telling people, no, you're not passing money in here. That ain't happening here. You can go outside and do this. You can do this anywhere else, but it is not happening in this house. And he totally blows it up and takes over. You've heard that before. Can you imagine just how furious the Pharisees were? In fact, it goes on. Let's just read what happens after that. It says that the chief priests and the scribes heard this and began seeking how to destroy him, for they were afraid of him, for the whole crowd was astonished at his teaching. They were ready to kill him. They wanted it done. Now, you know that. That's nothing new. But I want to point you to a very, very interesting verse that people often overlook. Verse 11, where we begin. He entered Jerusalem. He came into the temple, and he looked around at everything. Do you think this was the first time that they had ever sold stuff in the temple before? I mean, it's like he walked in. It's like, wow, where did all this stuff come from? I've never seen this before. It happened every week. Week after week after week. They were selling stuff all over the place. He didn't do anything then. He didn't do anything about it. But he walks in on the day that he enters in Jerusalem, which he has had his face set for days and weeks. And he looks around at everything. Kind of like what we might say is casing the joint. And he decides, now is the time? Really? Why do you think that now was the time? Because back on the Mount of Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah had come with a message from God. He said, it's time. And Jesus said, let's roll. And on our way, we're going to make sure that we give everybody plenty of reason to put me what I came to be placed upon. Jesus was at the exact right place at the exact right time. Wow. Who would do that? What would drive somebody to do something like that? I want you to turn to one more passage and we'll be finished. Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. Verse 2 says, Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. Offering, something freely given. He gave himself up because of his great love that he has for you and for me. He said, I'm an offering. I'm here. Now it's time. Let's work. He died for you. He died for me. And if you've never given your heart and life to him, I want you to know there's never been anybody else who did what Jesus has done for you. There's no one else who could do what Jesus did for you. And we want to invite you to give your heart and your life to him. Maybe you already are a child of God. I hope that Luke has demonstrated for you clearly today just how willingly Jesus went to the cross for you because of his great love for you, and that your heart would well up in appreciation once again for the great sacrifice that he made on our behalf. If you don't know Jesus, but you'd like to come to know Jesus, I'll be standing down in front of you in my time of invitation. Maybe you're overwhelmed by the fact that he would do that for you, and you're tired of fighting, you're tired of running from it. I'll be down front. Come and give your heart and life to Jesus Christ. You may just want to come to the altar and thank God for being so willing to do what he did on our our behalf. If you want to come for church membership, or if there's some other spiritual decision I can help you with, we're not going to linger. I already know what the time is. We're not going to linger unless somebody comes. If somebody comes, we'll stay here as long as the Spirit is moving, as long as He dictates. If no one comes, we'll be finished. God, we thank you for your great love for us and the demonstration of that love for us. It wasn't a secret love. It wasn't a passive love. We thank you for the great sacrifice that you made on our behalf and how you willingly put yourself